The hangar was always a little too cold at night, its long fluorescent lights flickering above the empty concrete floor, echoing with the distant clink of metal and murmurs of tired conversation. On most evenings, the pilots of Falcon Squadron gathered around the debriefing monitors, coffee in hand, reliving their missions like war stories at a corner bar. But tonight, the laughter was louder than usual, and the target of the humor wasn't a rookie mistake or a close call. It was First Lieutenant Emily Parks. She nailed that turn again, 27 degrees. Down to the decimal, Captain Rick Donnelly chuckled, tapping the screen with his coffee mug. Who even flies like that? Might as well plug her into the simulator and let the machine fly itself. Laughter erupted from the group of pilots. Some clapped each other on the back, others tossed in their own barbs, jabs wrapped in camaraderie, but just sharp enough to sting. "Hey, someone tell Parks this isn't a figure skating competition," another pilot joked. "We're flying combat, not choreographing ballet." At the far corner of the room, Emily sat quietly, eyes fixed on her flight tablet. She didn't respond. She never did. After months of the same routine, she had learned to keep her face blank and her mind focused. The laughter rolled toward her like waves, but she let it break and disappear. At least on the outside. Inside, her knuckles whitened against the edge of her tablet. To them, she was the machine. A pilot who flew with unnatural precision, every maneuver executed with textbook accuracy. Clean banks, perfect rolls, exact angles. But in the unforgiving arena of aerial combat, perfection was seen as a liability. The thinking went, machines don't win dogfights. Gut instinct does. You've got to feel the aircraft, anticipate chaos, bend the rules just enough to survive. Emily knew what they thought. She also knew they were wrong. Colonel Thomas Wetaker, the squadron's aging commander, finally cleared his throat, silencing the room. "Enough fun for one night. Tomorrow's mission is routine. Escort detail for 3 cargo freighters through the South Channel. Might be some pirate interference, but intel says it's low risk. No need to show off." His eyes briefly met Emily's across the room. No fancy flying, just the basics. The pilots filed out, their banter trailing behind them. None of them spoke to Emily. She didn't try to join. She waited until the room was empty. 3 hours later, while the rest of Falcon Squadron slept, a dim blue glow flickered from the corner of the operations archive. Emily sat alone at a secure terminal, a borrowed access card plugged into the slot, a quiet favor from a technician she'd helped months earlier with a system calibration. On the screen were flight pattern simulations and threat assessments that required command-level clearance. Each file bore red-lettered warnings Silasify Iwas Only. Dozens of formation patterns scrolled by, each more complex than the last. Not meant for standard pilots. Not taught in any simulator. She wasn't just curious, she was unsettled. Emily had spent months digging through these simulations, compiling countermeasures and attack profiles. Buried in one after-action report, she'd spotted a peculiar aerial formation, a triangle of fast, moving drones appearing and vanishing on radar in unpredictable bursts. The data had bothered her. The pattern didn't match anything in the squadron's current training library. She cross-referenced it with every formation in the classified archives. What she found chilled her. There was something out there, something fast, something organized, something the top brass wasn't talking about. She memorized the enemy formations, noted their evasive counters, and studied the timings like a concert pianist learning sheet music. Every night, she committed new maneuvers to memory, practicing them in the simulator under the guise of routine training. It wasn't obsession, it was preparation. The door to the archive room creaked open, and Lieutenant Jake Miller poked his head in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Parks? What the heck are you still doing here?" "Just running threat assessments," she replied without hesitation. He yawned. "You're gonna burn out that brain of yours. Even machines need rest." She offered a faint smile as he disappeared down the corridor. Emily didn't sleep that night. As she walked back to her bunk, her mind ran through every classified pattern she'd seen. Something was coming, she felt it deep in her bones. And when it did, it wouldn't be gut instinct that saved them. It would be the kind of precision flying she'd been mocked for since day one. They could laugh at the machine all they wanted. But one day soon, She'd be the only one flying the right pattern when it mattered, and she'd be ready. By the time First Lieutenant Emily Parks slipped into her bunk that night, the base was silent. Only the low hum of distant generators and the occasional crackle of the comm towers pierced the stillness. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't need to. Every image she'd reviewed in the archive room replayed in her mind like clockwork. There was a pattern, one she couldn't ignore. Buried deep in those classified flight files were radar snapshots and after-action reports that didn't make it into standard briefings. Over the past few months, Emily had pieced together something chilling: a sophisticated enemy formation known only in redacted memos and simulations marked Top CCRA, a tactic developed by a growing threat referred to as the Zarnak Coalition, a militarized alliance of rogue nations testing advanced drone warfare. The pattern they used was something Emily would never forget. It was called the Talon Box, a coordinated triangular ambush formation built to trap squadrons by subtly surrounding them, forcing them into narrow corridors of vulnerability. On radar, it showed up only in brief flashes, 3 or more blips, equidistant, appearing and vanishing like phantoms. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. But once locked in, it was almost impossible to break free without sustaining massive losses. The truly terrifying part: the simulations she'd found showed that standard Air Force evasion protocols didn't work against it. She couldn't unsee it, couldn't forget it, and she wouldn't ignore it. That night, as frost gathered on the edges of the barracks windows, Emily pulled out a small spiral notebook from under her pillow. She flipped through page after page of hand-drawn diagrams, maneuvers, altitude shifts, and counter angles. Some were scrawled hastily at 2 a.m., others copied directly from simulations she wasn't authorized to see. But every line served a purpose. Each night after missions, while others relaxed or cracked beers in the rec room, Emily returned to the simulator bay alone. She booked the late shifts, saying she was practicing coordination drills. In reality, she was flying combat exercises against a ghostly enemy no one else believed existed. She practiced the counters over and over. Reverse vectors, timing drops, altitude shears. She mapped how to break the Talon Box by disrupting the drone's internal algorithmic sync. In the simulations, there was a narrow window, just a few seconds long, where a coordinated vertical dive and sudden angular bank could throw off the drone's targeting AI. But the angle had to be exact. The drop rate had to be perfect. The squadron's timing had to be flawless. One mistake, and the whole flight would be lost. It was an impossible standard, but she didn't care. She trained for it anyway. She knew she was risking her career. Unauthorized access to classified files wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a fast track to court-martial. But that didn't scare her. What scared her was the silence from command. The fact that no one in her unit had been briefed on these enemy formations. The fact that senior brass acted as if nothing had changed. But Emily had seen the change. The Zarnak Coalition had moved past traditional fighters. They developed swarms of unmanned aerial drones with adaptive targeting. Machines that learned from every encounter and rewrote their attack patterns in real time. If a pilot rolled left the first time, the drone would expect that next time. They didn't just hunt, they studied. And the Air Force wasn't ready for it. One evening, as she left the simulator bay drenched in sweat and running on 2 hours of sleep, a voice stopped her in the hallway. "Burning the midnight oil again, Parks." It was Lieutenant Brad Turner, one of the more easygoing pilots in the squadron. He gave her a tired smile as he rubbed his eyes. "What are you chasing in there anyway?" "Just trying to stay sharp," Emily replied with a shrug. He nodded. "You know, people say you take this flying thing a bit too seriously." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe. Or maybe I just take staying alive seriously." Brad raised an eyebrow but said nothing more as he walked away. Behind her calm exterior, Emily knew something no one else did. The first Zarnak scouting wave had already appeared. Brief radar anomalies along the eastern corridor, easily dismissed as sensor ghosts or weather glitches. But Emily had overlaid the readings from those incidents against the formation templates from her simulations. It was a perfect match. She didn't have a date, didn't know the numbers or strength of the incoming force, but she knew they were coming. Every fiber of her being told her that this wasn't just paranoia. It was foresight. And she would rather be labeled a machine, mocked for her perfect angles and sterile flying, than watch another squadron walk into a trap unprepared. She knew what that kind of loss looked like. She had seen it 3 years earlier, in a folded flag and an empty chair at her brother's funeral. Captain Michael Parks had been a rising star in the 45th Fighter Wing. Confident, instinctive, everything Emily was not. His unit vanished during a recon mission over hostile territory. The official report cited unexpected enemy tactics and insufficient countermeasures. Emily never forgot those words, and she swore that would never happen again, not on her watch. So she studied, she practiced, and she prepared. Because someday, maybe tomorrow, maybe a week from now, those blips would come back on the radar. And when they did, everyone else might freeze. But she wouldn't. The sun was barely climbing over the eastern ridgeline when Falcon's squadron lifted off the tarmac the next morning. The sky above the South Channel was clear, a blue canvas stretching endlessly across the horizon. To the casual observer, it looked like any other routine escort mission. 7 fighter jets in standard diamond formation, shielding 3 cargo freighters bound for a naval installation further down the coast. But to First Lieutenant Emily Parks, nothing about this mission felt routine. Her eyes remained locked on her instruments. Every flicker on the radar, every fluctuation in altitude, she noted with silent intensity. She didn't laugh at the stories being passed around on the comms. Didn't trade quips or crack jokes like the others. She didn't have the luxury of pretending everything was normal. 2 hours into the flight, just north of Key Point Delta, it happened. 3 small blips appeared on her radar. They weren't in the flight plan. They didn't match any known military or civilian traffic. They just showed up, equidistant, in a loose triangle, then vanished. Her heart thudded slow and deliberate. She knew that shape still. She hesitated. The rest of the squadron hadn't seen it. She'd been monitoring with enhanced filters she'd secretly fine-tuned for just this moment. A few minutes later, 5 blips. Same formation. This time spread slightly wider. "Control, this is Falcon 3, she said calmly into her comm. "I'm picking up intermittent signals at heading 047. Triangular configuration. Can you confirm contact?" "Negative, Falcon 3. The controller replied after a short pause. "Skis are clear. Probably sensor ghosting from cloud scatter." Emily barely had time to respond before the entire radar display lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. Dozens of targets, multiple vectors, encircling. Then they saw it too. "What the hell?" Captain Rick Donnelly's voice broke over the comm. "Unknown bogies closing fast." Colonel Thomas Whitaker, the squadron commander, sounded strained. "Control, this is Falcon Lead. We have unconfirmed enemy contact, requesting immediate threat assessment." But Emily wasn't waiting for orders. She recognized the formation instantly. It wasn't just a random ambush. It was the Talon box, the very maneuver she had studied every night for the past 4 months. It was happening. A calm, eerie focus settled over her. Every warning bell in her cockpit was screaming. But she heard only the quiet rhythm of her breath and the steady thump of her heart. She knew exactly what would happen next if they didn't act. The drones would herd them, slowly, invisibly, into a trap with only one way out. "Break formation now," she ordered. "Initiate Delta Dispersal Protocol. Prepare vertical drop and spiral spread on my mark." There was a pause. Silence. Then Colonel Whitaker spoke. "You heard her. Do what she says." The squadron peeled away from their original formation, seemingly abandoning standard Air Force evasion training. But Emily didn't guide them randomly. She was walking them through a precise series of moves she had memorized from simulations never meant to see the light of day. Enemy fire streaked across the sky, laser-guided bursts meant for where they should have been. But thanks to Emily, they weren't there anymore. "Maintain heading for 7 seconds, then drop altitude 600 feet on my command," she called out. Now. The squadron dropped like synchronized dancers, slipping just under a fresh wave of attack. The drones overshot, briefly confused, slightly recalibrating. Emily wasn't finished. "Initiate spiral pattern. Sierra Echo 7. My lead." Every fighter followed her into a corkscrew motion, threading the one safe path through the formation, an escape route only she had studied, only she had prepared for. It lasted less than 4 minutes. But for everyone in that sky, it felt like a lifetime. When the final wave of drones pulled off and disappeared into the clouds, the silence over the comms was absolute. Not a single pilot spoke. Even the ground controller back at base had gone quiet. Then a young voice, Lieutenant Jason Boone, broke the stillness. What just happened? Emily's voice was steady. That was a test. A probing attack. The main assault will come in 2 weeks. Lieutenant. Whitaker's voice came in hard. How do you know that? And what the hell formation was that? Emily hesitated. She knew what she had to say might end her career. Admitting to unauthorized access mid-flight wasn't exactly standard protocol. But the truth was more important now than rank. I've studied this scenario, sir. The Talon box formation. It's Zarnuk drone strategy. They're mapping our reactions, learning how we fight. Standard training won't work. We have to fly outside the box, literally. A beat passed. Then Captain Donnelly's voice, so often mocking, sounded different. Hushed. You've been preparing for this? He said. That's what all those perfect turns were. You weren't showing off. You were getting ready. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. As the fighters turned back toward base, still reeling from what they had survived, something in the air had shifted. She wasn't the machine anymore. Not in their eyes. She was the reason they were alive. The landing strip was unusually quiet when Falcon's squadron touched down. As her fighter taxied toward the hangar, First Lieutenant Emily Parks felt the weight of every gaze on her. Not just the ground crew, who stood straighter than usual, eyes locked on her canopy, but the rest of the pilots too. They weren't looking at her with smirks or sideways glances anymore. They were looking at her like someone they didn't quite recognize. Someone who'd flown straight through fire and pulled them all out with her. Emily shut down the engine, removed her helmet with trembling fingers, and opened the cockpit. Before she could even climb down, 2 military police officers were already standing at the ladder. Lieutenant Parks, one of them said firmly, "You are to come with us immediately." She knew this moment was coming. But before she could move, a voice barked from across the tarmac. "She's not going anywhere." It was Colonel Thomas Whitaker, walking toward them with slow, purposeful steps. "This is my squadron, my pilot. Until I say otherwise, she answers to me." The MPs exchanged an uneasy glance, then stepped aside. Whitaker looked up at Emily, "My office." Now, as they walked together across the concrete, Captain Rick Donnelly jogged up behind them. "Permission to join the debrief, sir?" he asked. Whitaker gave a brief nod. "Granted." Inside the command building, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Whitaker took his seat behind the desk. Donnelly stood to the side, arms crossed. "Start talking," Whitaker said without preamble. "How did you recognize that formation? And don't tell me it was intuition." Emily stood tall, voice calm. "Sir, I've been accessing classified intelligence reports over the past 4 months, using borrowed clearance." Donnelly let out a low whistle. "You're aware that's grounds for a court-martial?" "Yes, sir, I am." Whitaker didn't flinch. "Why?" "Because the tactics we were drilling in training didn't account for the kind of threat we just encountered," Emily explained. "I raised the issue through official channels. I was told it would be addressed in due time. It wasn't." She took a breath. "So I did what I had to do. I studied the Talon box formation. I trained in secret. I memorized the only countermeasures proven to work against autonomous drones that adapt mid-fight." Whitaker narrowed his eyes. "You're saying command knew about this threat?" "Yes, sir, for over a year. But they limited the intelligence to high-level officers. Regular line pilots, like us, weren't briefed. They said it was to avoid unnecessary alarm." Before Whitaker could respond, the door burst open. General Wallace Harmon entered the room, flanked by 2 stern-looking intelligence officers. His silver hair and pressed uniform gave him an air of gravitas that filled the room instantly. "Connell," he said briskly, "Lieutenant Parks is to be taken into custody immediately. Unauthorized access to top-level intelligence. Gross misconduct." Whitaker stood. "Before you do that, General, I suggest you review her combat log from this morning's mission." "I've already reviewed it," Harmon said flatly. She executed maneuvers that were never part of our protocol, without clearance and without orders. She saved our entire squadron? Donnelly snapped. Sir, if Parks hadn't recognized that formation, we'd all be dead right now. That's not the point. One of the intelligence officers cut in. Her methods were reckless. She disobeyed a system that exists to protect national security. No, Emily said quietly. I disobeyed a system that chose secrecy over survival. The room fell into heavy silence. Then Whittaker, never one for dramatics, stepped around his desk. I've served in the Air Force for over 30 years, he said. I've seen men and women honored for far less than what this pilot did today. She didn't just break protocol. She exposed a hole in our defenses big enough to fly a bomber through. Harmon looked at Emily long and hard. You understand what you're admitting to, Lieutenant. I do, sir. I accept whatever punishment the board decides. But I'd do it again. Harmon gave a sharp nod. Then we'll let the board decide. 2 days passed. Emily was grounded, confined to quarters while the formal review was conducted. She spent the time reviewing her notes, not knowing whether her future held a promotion or a prison cell. On the morning of the 3rd day, she was summoned back to headquarters. This time, Harmon sat alone at the conference table. He gestured for her to sit, then slid a thick envelope across the table. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter bearing the seal of the United States Air Force. Promotion orders, effective immediately. To the rank of captain, Harmon said, his tone unreadable. The board ruled that while your actions violated standard protocol, they demonstrated exceptional initiative, foresight, and leadership under fire. He leaned back. The truth is, we needed someone like you to expose the flaw before it killed more pilots. Emily exhaled slowly. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Harmon added. You'll be leading tactical readiness training for Falcon Squadron, preparing them for the main Zarnok offensive, which we now believe will hit within 2 weeks. Emily nodded. As she stood to leave, Harmon spoke again. Captain, your perfection wasn't the problem. It was the warning we failed to hear. Captain Emily Parks stood at the front of the base's main briefing room, flanked by wall-to-wall display monitors, now pulsing with new, top-secret data. Behind her, rows of chairs filled with pilots once so quick to laugh now sat in absolute silence. Among them was Captain Rick Donnelly, her former critic, now her second-in-command. To their left, Colonel Thomas Whittaker and General Wallace Harmon looked on from the raised command platform, arms folded, their expressions solemn. This wasn't a routine morning briefing. This was a mission to save them all. Before it was too late, Emily pointed to a graphic that lit up the main screen, a complex web of Zarnok drone flight paths, predictive targeting algorithms, and, highlighted in red, a fatal flaw. Our standard evasive maneuvers won't work, she said, voice clear and steady. Zarnok drones learn. They record our reaction times, formation habits, and most common countermeasures. By the second encounter, they already know what we'll do. The pilots leaned forward. The reality was sinking in. Why have 2 weeks? Possibly less, until the main force reaches our airspace. That means every one of you has to unlearn what you think you know and start flying like your life depends on precision. Because it does. She advanced to the next slide, a tight, sloping turn captured from real footage. This is a 24-degree bank. Done right, it will redirect an enemy drone's tracking pattern by a fraction of a second. That may not sound like much, but at max speeds, that half second is the difference between a near miss and a direct hit. She paused. And I expect every one of you to hit it perfectly. Not a word was said in return. Not a joke, not a scoff. Training began the next morning at 0600 sharp. The first few days were brutal. Emily ran the squadron through maneuver after maneuver. From dawn to well past sundown, they drilled in the simulators and in the air. Precision wasn't optional, it was life or death. No more rounding angles, no more flying by feel. Everything had to be exact. Too wide, Lieutenant Boone, she called out as one pilot missed a tight arc. That's 25 degrees. You give the AI a clean lock doing that. He nodded, sweat streaking down his face. Yes, Mom. Reflying now. By the end of day 3, even the most skeptical pilots began to see it. Emily's flying, once mocked as robotic, was now the gold standard. Captain Donnelly, to his credit, wasn't just participating, he was leading from the front. Where he once rolled his eyes at Emily's style, now he backed her up without hesitation. You want to survive the next engagement. He barked at a younger pilot, then you better start flying like she does. No ego, just precision. In the mess hall, quiet conversations turned into requests for tips. Pilots began asking Emily to review their footage. Some sat with her late into the night, rewatching simulator runs, taking notes on what to change. The squadron had stopped mocking her. Now they were listening. On day 10, Emily stood in the observation deck above the simulator bays, watching Captain Donnelly run a training sequence for the junior flight team. He moved through the steps with the same rhythm she had once flown alone in secret. The same calculated flow. He spotted her and waved her down. We're running the Sierra Delta spiral again at 70% drone aggression, he said. They're still a hair too slow on the third drop. Mind helping them out? She stepped down into the simulator floor without a word, taking over the console. The pilots inside their capsules straightened when they heard her voice over the comm. All right, let's break this down. You're entering the zone 5 degrees too high. Adjust your roll earlier. And when you pull into the dive, trust the math. Don't chase the drone. Beat it to where it's going. Even the rookies listened without hesitation now. By day 13, something unexpected began to happen. Morale improved. The fear that had hung like fog over the airfield since the drone encounter began to lift. Not because the threat was gone, but because now they had a plan. Every flight, every drill, every repeated maneuver turned fear into discipline. The pilots began calling Emily Captain Parks, without a trace of sarcasm. In fact, they took pride in it. Some even started referring to the new training program as the machine doctrine. What had once been a joke about her perfection had become their path to survival. That evening, Emily returned to her quarters and found a small box on her bunk. Inside was a silver pin, handcrafted in the shape of a perfect 24-degree angle. Taped to the lid was a note in Donnelly's handwriting, "For the precision that saved us, and the pilot we now follow without question." She didn't cry. Not then, but she traced the angle with her thumb and smiled, just slightly. The next morning, the sirens wailed across the base. The main force had arrived. As the pilots ran to their fighters, Donnelly caught her arm. His voice was calm, but resolute. "Let us through it, Captain." Emily nodded. And with that, she climbed into her cockpit, took a deep breath, and prepared to fly the mission she'd spent months perfecting. Because now, they were all flying like she did. The alarm siren screamed across Falcon Air Base just after 05:30. The automated voice over the intercom was calm, but the message it carried was anything but. Multiple unidentified aircraft detected. Outer defense perimeter breached. This is not a drill. Within seconds, pilots sprinted down the tarmac, flight suits half-zipped, helmets in hand. Ground crews raced to the jets like a well-oiled machine. The air buzzed with urgency, but not panic, not anymore. Because this time they were ready. Captain Emily Parks climbed into her cockpit without hesitation. The moment her fingers wrapped around the flight controls, the calm she'd trained for flooded in. Every hour in the simulator, every lecture, every 24-degree turn, every spiral maneuver, they were all leading to this moment. In her earpiece, Colonel Whitaker's voice cut through the chaos. "Falcon Squadron, launch in sequence. Intercept pattern Delta. Engage only on command." As Emily taxied out, Captain Rick Donnelly's voice joined the comm line. "We're with you, Captain. Just say the word." She didn't need to look. She knew the entire squadron was behind her. They took off in rapid succession, slicing into the morning sky like arrows drawn to a silent bullseye. As they climbed past 10,000 feet, the radar screens lit up, dozens of red markers in tight, overlapping clusters. But to Emily, it wasn't chaos. It was a map she had seen before. The main Zarnok formation had arrived. They weren't just drones this time. These were Hunter-class AI-driven fighters, weaving through the sky with a mind of their own, each unit flying with terrifying precision, each learning and adapting in real time. To most it looked like a death trap, but to Emily, it looked like the exact simulation she'd memorized down to the second. Her voice came steady over the comms. "Falcon Squadron, this is Captain Parks. Prepare counter-maneuver Sierra 7, double helix formation. Do not deviate. We've trained for this. There was no hesitation in the replies. Copy that. Moving into formation. On your lead, Captain. The double helix was one of the most complex evasion patterns ever conceived. Two interwoven spirals, shifting altitude and vector in synchronized opposition. It only worked if everyone performed with absolute precision. One wrong angle, one mistimed bank, and the whole thing unraveled. But Emily didn't worry. She knew they could do it. They'd practiced it again and again. Execute on my mark, she called. 3, 2, 1 now. The next 3 hours would be remembered in Falcon Base history as the most intense aerial battle ever fought over the South Channel. Waves of Zarnok drones came in waves, each smarter than the last. Their AI systems adapted mid-fight, shifting strategies, baiting pilots into errors. But Emily was always one step ahead. Every time they changed course, she was ready. Every time they tried to flank, she anticipated their angle. Falcon 6, dive now. Roll out and hold altitude at 9,200 feet. Falcon 2, bank left, 24 degrees. Yes, exactly. Her voice never cracked. Her instructions were short, sharp, and absolute. When enemy drones swarmed in layered attack arcs, she guided the squadron into inverted drop spirals. When they launched coordinated vertical spikes, she ordered corkscrew counters. Every move had been practiced. Every response had been drilled. By the second hour, the battle had moved past tactics. It had become endurance. Emily could feel the sweat pooling beneath her helmet, her gloves soaked, her breathing shallow. Her arms ached from maintaining control against constant G-forces. But she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Captain, how are you staying ahead of them? Donnelly asked between bursts of evasive fire. I'm not, she answered. I'm flying the pattern before they finish learning it. It was a chess match with supersonic pieces, and Emily Parks had memorized the board months ago. By the end of the third hour, the Zarnok drones began retreating, first a few, then en masse. It wasn't panic. It was programming. They'd gathered enough data, enough for their next strike. But they hadn't won this one. Not even close. Not a single Falcon pilot had gone down. No injuries. No casualties. When the last red marker vanished from her radar, Emily finally exhaled. The sky was quiet again. Mission complete, she said softly. Let's bring it home. As they landed, the entire base was waiting. Crews lined the runway. Officers stood in silence. Mechanics held back tears. What they'd just witnessed, it wasn't just a successful defense. It was a turning point. Colonel Whittaker met Emily on the tarmac as she stepped down from her fighter. He snapped a formal salute. Captain Parks, he said for all to hear. On behalf of Falcon Squadron and the United States Air Force, thank you. Behind him, the rest of the pilots followed suit. One by one, they raised their hands in salute. Last in line was Donnelly. He stepped forward, looked her in the eye, and said just 4 words. We followed your lead. Emily said nothing in return. She didn't have to, because the battle was over. And for the first time, they all saw her not as the machine, but as the commander who saved them. The day after the battle, the skies above Falcon Air Base were silent. But the echoes of what had happened, the fight, the precision, the survival, hung thick in the air like morning fog. Captain Emily Parks walked alone through the hangar, her flight suit half-zipped, a thin sheen of sweat still drying on her brow. Though the battle had ended hours ago, her muscles ached as if the cockpit still held her. Her mind, however, was clear. Clearer than it had been in years. She had done what she was told couldn't be done. She had taken a squadron that had once laughed at her, doubted her, and dismissed her, and led them through a hellish storm of AI-controlled warfare with 0 casualties. The very flight style they mocked, the exact angles, the textbook-perfect maneuvers, had become the standard that kept them alive. And for the first time, Emily wasn't just seen. She was respected. Later that afternoon, the entire squadron gathered in the briefing room, not for orders, not for intel, but for something else. Colonel Thomas Whittaker stood at the front, flanked by Captain Rick Donnelly, who now carried a small, neatly wrapped box in his hands. The room was still. No one laughed. No one whispered. They all turned as Emily entered, standing taller than she ever had, though the weight of what had just occurred was still resting gently on her shoulders. Whittaker gestured for her to step forward. In combat, he began, you expect excellence. But yesterday, We witnessed something greater. Leadership through precision, preparation, and unwavering belief in doing what's right, even when no one else does. He nodded to Donnelly, who handed her the box. Inside, cushioned in black velvet, was a handcrafted silver pin, angled exactly 24 degrees. The very angle they once mocked. The very turn that had saved their lives. Donnelly cleared his throat. It's not official Air Force issue, Captain. But we took up a collection. He paused, then added, "We figured it's time we honored what really kept us alive out there." The room stood and applauded. Not just politely, not just out of obligation, but with the kind of slow, rising respect usually reserved for legends. Emily didn't say much. She simply held the pin in her palm and nodded, once, to each of them. That night, long after the rest of the base had gone quiet, Emily sat on the edge of her bunk in her quarters. The 24-degree pin sat on the nightstand beside her, catching the soft orange glow of the desk lamp. She reached into the inner pocket of her flight jacket and pulled out an old, worn photograph. One she always kept with her, tucked near her heart. It showed a smiling young man in uniform, one arm slung casually around her shoulder. His name was Michael Parks, her older brother, her hero, her inspiration, the one who never made it back. He had flown for the 45th Tactical Reconnaissance Wing years ago. His squadron had been lost in a surprise drone ambush that no one had seen coming. At least, not in time. Command had said it was an unanticipated enemy shift. Emily had never believed that. She traced the outline of Michael's face with her finger, the silence of the room pressing against her like a memory. "We made it, Mike," she whispered. "We were ready this time. I was ready." The next morning, the tone of the base had changed. The word had spread. About the battle. About Emily. About how the machine had saved them, not in spite of her perfect flying, but because of it. Pilots from other squadrons asked to observe her training drills. Commanders requested briefings. Her tactics were already being written into updated training manuals, and no one rolled their eyes at her 24-degree banks anymore. Even the younger recruits, fresh out of academy, spoke her name with quiet admiration. For them, she wasn't just a captain. She was proof that flying by the book could win a battle against an enemy that rewrote the rules. One afternoon, Donnelly stopped her on the runway after a routine recon patrol. His tone was casual, but his words carried weight. "I used to think your style was stiff," he admitted. "Too clean, too predictable." Emily raised an eyebrow. He smiled. "Now I know. It wasn't about flying pretty. It was about surviving when everything else fails." "You showed us that." She didn't answer. Instead, she pinned the 24-degree silver badge on her flight vest, just beneath her name tag, not to show off, but as a reminder, because some people chase glory, others chase instinct. But Emily Parks, she chased perfection. And when the sky turned red and the system screamed and every instinct said to run, perfection was what brought them home. Perfection isn't boring when it keeps us alive, she thought. Not anymore. Sometimes in life, the things people mock you for are the very things that one day save lives. Captain Emily Parks was called the Machine, not out of praise but ridicule. They said her flying was too perfect, too calculated, too stiff. She didn't argue. She didn't lash out. She just kept working in silence. While others joked, she studied. While others rested, she practiced. And when the sky finally lit up with fire and the world turned upside down, it wasn't instinct or charm that saved her squadron. It was preparation. It was precision. It was the same 24-degree turn they once laughed at, now honored in silver. Being overlooked doesn't mean you're wrong. Being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. And being precise doesn't make you boring. Sometimes, being exactly who you are, steady, prepared, and thoughtful, is the greatest gift you can offer a world that values flash over substance. If you've ever been the one in the background, the one who cared more than others knew, the one who prepared while no one was watching, then this story is for you. You matter. What you do matters, even if the world doesn't see it yet. Now we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated for being too careful, too quiet, or too precise? Have you ever had a moment where your preparation, your dedication, made all the difference? Share your story in the comments. Let's celebrate the people who don't ask for recognition, but absolutely deserve it. And if you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true to life stories that uplift, inspire, and honor everyday heroes. Click the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. And of course, leave a like if this touched your heart today. Thank you for spending your time with us. We're here to tell stories that matter, and we're so glad you're part of that mission. Until next time, fly steady, fly true, and never apologize for being prepared.